The recent escalation of attacks on Israel by Iran-backed proxies, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, and Hezbollah in Lebanon, has placed Israel once again at a multi-front war. These coordinated campaigns, which include missile strikes very close to Tel Aviv, renewed hostilities in Gaza, and simmering tension along the Lebanese border, underscore the growing regional volatility and the challenges that Israeli security faces after the collapse of the ceasefire with Hamas. Last week, the Houthis launched a ballistic missile towards the Ben Gurion International Airport near Tel Aviv. Fortunately, it was intercepted by Israel's air defense systems before it crossed over into Israeli territory. This marked the second such attempt by the Houthis in a week, following another attack just a day earlier involving two missiles. The Houthis have explicitly warned that the Ben Gurion airport will remain dangerous for air traffic until Israel ends its Gaza offensive and lifts the blockade there. The Houthis possess medium-range ballistic missiles, which are estimated to be in the range of 1,000 to 2,000 kilometers, which are entirely capable of reaching Israel if they are fired from Yemen. Their accuracy and their consistency, though, are doubtful, particularly because most of them have been intercepted by the Iron Dome air defense systems. Their repeated targeting of the Ben Gurion airport, which is a critical civilian and economic transport hub, demonstrates both intent as well as evolving military capability by the Houthis. While Israel's defenses, the Arrow 3 and the Iron Dome systems, have neutralized these threats so far, a successful strike could disrupt global air travel and it could inflict mass casualties. Something that would be a catastrophe for Israel, particularly with its ongoing war right now having been renewed against Hamas in Gaza. Simultaneously, the Houthis are continuing to attack commercial and military vessels in the Red Sea and in the Gulf of Aden. Since October of 2023, right after the Hamas terror attack, the Houthis have executed over 100 maritime strikes. They have sunk 2 ships, they've damaged dozens of others. Their tactics now include using ballistic and cruise missiles, the use of sea drones, which are like these unmanned explosive boats, which are cheap but very, very effective in damaging a very important commercial sea lane, as well as direct hijackings like what they did with the hijacking of the ship MV Galaxy Leader back in November of 2023. The crew of that ship were held in captivity for 15 months and they were released only after intervention by Oman. The Houthi group has also established a de facto toll system. They extort fees from shipping companies for safe passage, and they blockade vessels that have any links or are flagged by either Israel, the United States, or the UK. These actions have diverted about 30% of global container traffic to longer routes around Africa, and that has raised shipping costs by about 40%, and it has thereby destabilized global supply chains. But Israel is being pounded by renewed attacks after the fragile truce with Hamas, which was in place since January of 2025, collapsed last week. Israeli airstrikes killed over 400 Palestinians in Gaza. Hamas has retaliated to that by firing rockets into southern Israel. It is the first such set of attacks that happened since the ceasefire began. The Ministry of Health in Gaza says more than 50,000 have died since this war began 16 months ago. The temporary ceasefire fell through because Hamas refused Israel's demand to release the remaining hostages without the guarantee of a permanent ceasefire. The IDF announced a partial buffer zone in central Gaza, which was a clear signal that it plans for a prolonged occupation. In fact, the Defense Minister, Israel Katz, even said that the forces could temporarily occupy Gaza to get Hamas to relinquish weapons. With Gaza's death toll now surpassing 50,000, Hamas is seeking to rally regional support by portraying itself as the defender of Palestinian rights and Palestinian civilians. On Israel's northern border, clashes with Hezbollah have diminished, but they have not ceased entirely following a tentative ceasefire. But they have now restarted again over the weekend after the collapse of what was a ceasefire which lasted for a number of months. The Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, which fired over 3,000 rockets into Israel during the initial months after the war in Gaza began, retains an arsenal of over 100,000 precision-guided missiles. Now, while both sides want to avoid large-scale engagements, localized skirmishes continue to persist, like what we saw this weekend. Hezbollah is signaling that it can resume full hostilities if the Gaza war intensifies. The Lebanese army so far has been unsuccessful in pushing Hezbollah north of the Litani River, which they were supposed to do as per the ceasefire agreement. The synchronized attacks by the Houthis, Hamas, and Hezbollah highlight Iran's axis of resistance, which aims to stretch Israeli defenses across multiple fronts. Iran provides the Houthis with missile components and drone technology. The Houthi proxies then time and again make their strikes to maximize psychological impact. It's timed in a way. For example, the Houthi missile launches that happened last week happened during the latest round of US-Israeli diplomatic meetings in order to put pressure on those meetings. Tehran is using these groups to pressurize Western governments, particularly America, into giving it concessions on sanctions as well as increasing its regional influence. So how is Israel likely to respond to these latest provocations? The IDF has already conducted cross-border raids into Yemen, targeting missile depots. Expect increased collaboration with the US Central Command for intelligence sharing. President Trump has reversed a temporary pause on airstrikes against the Houthis, which was imposed by the previous Biden administration. Last week's airstrikes by America killed more than 50 Houthis, which is according to a statement that's been put out by the Pentagon. Israel will also lobby for stricter UN sanctions on Tehran's missile program, even though Russia and China could potentially veto this. President Trump is also keen to revive the old nuclear deal with Iran, which he appended during his first term. The convergence of Houthi missile campaigns, Hamas's guerrilla tactics, and Hezbollah's rocket attacks have left Israel encircled by enemies who are using asymmetric tactics. The sheer geographic spread of these attacks risks overwhelming Israeli defenses. The coming weeks could either see a negotiated de-escalation, which is predicated on the ceasefire in Gaza returning, as well as maritime security deals, or we could go in the opposite direction. There could be a bigger regional war, which will inevitably draw in American and European navies in the region.